playbook that other leaders have had success with when they came to meet with President Trump, and that's basically to flatter him. And that's exactly the position that he took. His attitude was to bend over backwards and say anything he could to try to essentially blow up President Trump, and he did that, even talking at one point, I think, about building a Trump Tower in North Korea. So it just shows the extent to which he came prepared, and knowing that you basically have to do everything you can to flatter him.
South Korea's president very recently came into office almost 2 months ago. How might President Trump's recent comments about the country's political situation, we heard from our reporter just a few minutes ago about the Truth Social post, and also his comments today, affect investor confidence and the broader U.S.-South Korea trade relationship?
Well, I think that there's a big concern there, and I think that's why South Korea wanted to agree to a trade agreement in the first place. You know, South Korea had a comprehensive trade agreement with the United States that basically President Trump just tore up and threw away. And so I think that their sense was that by trying to come to some kind of agreements, they'd try to reach some kind of stability. You know, as I point out to my students all the time, the biggest threat to business success is uncertainty. And there's so much uncertainty that President Trump has brought into so many trade relations right now. And certainly that's been the case with South Korea. I know the South Koreans want to try to get back into some position where they can find some kind of certainty with what's going to happen in the future, even if it's not exactly in the position that they wanted to be in the first place. South
Korea's president stopping in Philadelphia to look at some of that shipbuilding tomorrow. Given the recent trade agreement capping tariffs at 15%, we know that this is all still being finalized. What are the main points of contention that U.S. officials still have with this deal? Any challenges or complications moving forward?
Well, let me start by saying that much of the actual details of this agreement really haven't been shared with the public. So, you know, one wonders to what extent this is actually an agreement as opposed to some kind of framework for discussion. You know, we've seen the president kind of equivocate on those things a couple of times. But beyond that, I'd say a big thing has to do with the investments that the South Koreans are promising to make into the United States. You know, there's this sense that you know, a big portion of those funds are funds that had already been committed to, actually, during the Biden administration. And then the question is then what projects will these be directed towards, and you know, what kind of monitoring mechanisms are there going to be to make sure that these investments actually happen? You know, there have been promises made in the past that never came to fruition, both from South Korea and other countries. And so the question is this going to be just more hot air, or is it actually going to turn into something real?
We also saw that several heads of South Korea's biggest companies also came to Washington, Hyundai, Samsung, to meet with U.S. officials and their counterparts, other business officials in the United States. How important then is this type of gathering, and how might U.S. businesses with operations or supply chains in South Korea respond? I mean, is there something that can be said for working together on the corporate level far below the political level?
Oh, there's definitely something to be said for that. And I think the South Koreans realize just how critical the United States is to their country. I mean, unlike some other countries which have a much more diversified trading array of partners, South Korea relies very heavily on their trade with the United States. In fact, I believe the United States is their largest trading partner, and they enjoy a huge trade surplus with the United States. So as a result of that, they really don't want to let that go. So there have been these company efforts that have been made directly from South Korean companies to U.S. companies. They're also very concerned about kind of the concerns that the American companies have, because as you pointed out earlier, with all this uncertainty there has actually been a decline in business investment here in the United States. And a lot of that is driven by the fact both that there are these tariffs coming and the businesses don't exactly know how these are going to play out, but also they just don't know what's going to be happening from one day to the next at a policy level. As a result of that, I think the South Korean businesses really want to reassure their American partners that they are someplace that the Americans still want to invest in and still want to do business with.
What are the broader implications for U.S. trade policy in Asia, especially when comparing the administration's approach to South Korea versus China and maybe some of the others?
Well, I think that this really has been a great opportunity for China, frankly, and I think the Chinese recognize that. The United States has kind of positioned itself as being this rock of stability when it comes to trade and to foreign affairs throughout the world, and President Trump has really upended that entirely. As I pointed out earlier, South Korea had a settled, comprehensive trade agreement with the United States that actually included very low tariffs on both sides, and President Trump basically just walked in the door and threw that out. And I know for a fact that other countries are kind of looking at their agreements with President Trump even and wondering to themselves, are these really the kind of agreements that are going to stand up over time? And that kind of uncertainty, as I say, is both bad for business and bad for diplomacy.
Professor Michael Greiner, thank you so much for joining us from Detroit, Michigan. Appreciate it.
Great to be here.